Well, the Presidential Climate Commission is today holding its ordinary quarterly meeting to review progress on its work program for the third quarter of 2023. Commission is an independent body established by President Cyril Ramaphosa with the purpose to oversee and facilitate a just and equitable transition towards a low emissions and climate resilient economy. James Reeler, Senior Manager for Climate Action, joins us live to unpack the importance of this meeting for South Africa. James, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Afternoon. Thank you for having me.
So in view of the review that's currently taking place, in your opinion, are we on the right track in achieving climate agreements made at COP27?
It depends who you ask what you mean by we. I think it's very important to note that sort of the global stocktake that's happening under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has really pointed out that the world as a whole is not on track for meeting those targets. And South Africa is working hard to try and get up to speed in this. But yes, I think there's certainly a lot of work that we still need to do. All of our commitments are conditional. We're saying we do this as long as other nations bring their sort of action to the table. But we also do have a certain amount of action that we need to do ourselves. And whilst we have been implementing some of it, we're still too slow to meet the needs of climate action.
No, absolutely. And speaking of which, there's obviously short-term and long-term implications. To date, we've been seeing some adverse climate change phenomenon in South Africa alone. What are you observing on that front?
So for any particular event, it's quite hard to say that this was driven by climate change. Certainly what we can say is that the expectations that science has given us of what we're likely to see as the climate changes are now being played out at some level. So where we're having extreme heat events and we've seen people dying up in sort of the north and Limpopo from extreme weather, or similarly, more action, more active hurricanes, higher rainfall events, those sorts of things are likely to get exacerbated by climate change. And it should be noted that this year, we've seen some of the most extreme anomalies in sea surface temperatures and ice melt around the sort of ice caps that we have ever seen. So it's clear that what we're seeing now is there's a fingerprint of climate change in it, and that it is just a taster of what is to come. Things are only going to get worse unless we take serious action at this point.
No, absolutely. Speaking of taking action, I wonder, given the work of the Commission, how we also begin to ensure that inclusivity happens, the empowerment of marginalized communities in the climate change discourse, so it doesn't become elitist. I wonder also what the role of women is in terms of that representation as well.
So, absolutely. I think one of the key elements of the just transition, which is a key focus for the Presidential Climate Commission, of which one of our staff members at WWF is a commissioner, is to ensure that the transition is just. And so that does mean that there has to be a very wide-scale consultation of South African citizens, and to ensure that everybody is brought along the path with the Commission. The Commission doesn't get to dictate policy. The Commission is a body that makes recommendations after consultation. And whilst there have certainly been critiques about how well that consultation has been done, I think it is certainly clear that they have been taking their mandate very seriously in trying to reach a large number of people. And so the role of women and youth has been playing a role, has been featuring within the Climate Commission's actions. They've been trying to elucidate both opinions from youth and sort of to see how they see the climate action should play out, and also to strengthen the role of women and youths who are essentially, in many cases, more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change.
No, because planning is crucial, collaborations are crucial. You've alluded to this. Innovation is also going to be key, perhaps as we navigate what the skills are for the future. How we also incorporated into some of the sustainable digital solutions. What's been observed on that front?
So I think it's important to say that whilst innovation is very important and useful and will help us get a long way, what's actually true is that we have the tools available to hand to address a lot of this. It's just a question of implementation. And so when you mention things like digital solutions, the reality is that most of the change is going to happen around kind of efficiencies of consumption, energy efficiency, and really a lot of work on the energy system and our economy to be more resilient. And that means moving away from fossil fuels towards alternative energy needs, but also taking into account that we need to increase the amount of energy available to most of our citizens. There's a critical question of energy justice. Most households have very little energy available and little access. But I think that sort of innovative solutions play out, not necessarily just in the technical realm, but actually also in the social realm. There's got to be a lot of work at a community level and at a subnational level to help communities and municipalities build resilient solutions to the impacts of climate change and to really drive a lot of the mitigation action that we need. So it's action that plays out at all levels in society.
James, thank you for those sentiments now, because as we begin to wrap up, I wonder if you'd like to comment on China's role in South Africa, perhaps in relation to South Africa's energy crisis, but also in the fight against climate change, their role in the global sphere. What are some of the concerns, but also the strides that have been taken on that front?
It's a very good question. So I think a lot of the time, there's a lot of whataboutism in climate action, saying, for instance, South Africa only commits, sort of puts out about 1% of the world's greenhouse gases. So how does that make any difference if we stop? And similarly, if we were to expand our use of fossil fuels, we'd only be claiming kind of our developmental space. Whereas nations like America and so a lot of the developed nations have a long history. In fact, they're the drivers of the climate crisis. And China is a new player in this space. China went over the last 2 decades from being still a fairly minor player to being the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. But at the same time, it is, or it was until very recently, the largest nation in the world. And so if you look at a per capita level, it hasn't been particularly terrible. But what it has done over those 20 years is it's built a lot of coal power plants, which now they are a little bit concerned about. Obviously, they're seeing not just the impacts of climate change, but also serious local pollution and huge human health impacts from that. They are, at the same time, the world's biggest implementer of renewable energy. Over the last year, China rolled out as much PV as exists in America as a whole. So effectively, they replicated that amount of photovoltaic energy in a single year. And China, for better or worse, is going to be the engine that drives that shift in the near term. They're the fastest builder of renewable energy, they have the fastest rollout of electric vehicles, and they have increasing influence across the world. And so, for instance, in our energy crisis, where China came in to help us look at how do we take our hospitals and schools out of the load shedding system to try and provide local power, which is yet to be implemented, but was committed. That's a very small commitment for a country of the size of China. I think what we're likely to see over the very near term is the shift in China, where they're pushing very strongly to renewable energy, is going to carry on driving prices down, and it's going to just even if not directly through investment, but indirectly through the scale of implementation, help it become more affordable for nations like South Africa. And just to say that at present, obviously, renewable energy is the cheapest electricity to connect to the grid. It's the cheapest way of providing electricity. So for all intents and purposes, even for addressing our own crisis needs, South Africa is looking at renewable energy as the means of doing that.
Oh, James, all of this set to come to the fore, perhaps as the Presidential Climate Commission holds its 11th ordinary quarterly meeting, perhaps to review the progress to date. But thank you for your time with us on the SABC and for those sentiments. James Reela, Senior Manager for Climate Action, unpacking the importance of this meeting, particularly for South Africa at large.